welcome to the Equip for Life podcast. I am so excited to have a bunch of special people on this episode. So Emily's back. My co-host Emily's back. It's been a while. So good to have you back. But also we've got Andrew Kaake from our team. He is our lead editor. He is our main philosophy guy. He's our main research guy. He edits all of the articles that go out. He writes a lot of the articles and even some of the video scripts that we do. And then finally, we've been talking about doing this for well over a year. It is finally time. Monica Snyder, Secular Pro-Life's new executive director. She's finally working full-time in the pro-life movement like I've been wanting to happen for a half dozen years. Monica, so good to have you on the podcast as well.
Thanks for having me.
I thought it would be good to have all four of us here for this particular topic because there is a pretty wide diversity of experiences in the room. So, Monica is a really good friend of mine. She's one of my closest friends. So we talk a lot just behind the scenes, talking shop, like a lot. And I've noticed that like the kinds of pro-choice people that she has to deal with at Secular Pro-Life are pretty different oftentimes than the pro-choice people that we deal with at ERI. And then even also sometimes the pro-life people that she's dealing with are different than the pro-life people that we deal with. And so when we got this question about how to deal with difficult pro-life people or pro-life people who you just are on a different page on like the tactics or the approach, how do we deal with that? Which is easily one of the most common questions that we ever get asked. So it's finally time to...
It's come up like at least 5 times on our social media comments. I run our social media comments now, and it has come up so many times. And I was like, we need to do a podcast on this, guys.
I get asked all the time on Q&As. I think there's just a lot of pro-life people that if they're kind of on our page, and I'm using the Royal, or like Secular Pro-Life and us, we're all working to kind of shape the pro-life movement, I think, in a certain more effective way than what it maybe has been in the past. And so a lot of people, if they're kind of like on that page with us, they're like, okay, well, not everyone is on this page. So what do I do? It is driving me crazy. Like Sidewalk Counseling Masterclass. We put out the Sidewalk Counseling Masterclass, and easily, by like a factor of 2 or 3, the most common question we get is, I'm trying to sidewalk counsel here at this clinic, and there's this dude over here with a bullhorn, and he's yelling Bible verses at people as they walk into the clinic. What do I do about this? Because that dude is making me less effective. It's a big problem. Like it really matters. So it's kind of a touchy topic. It's a little bit hard to talk about, and certainly one that I've spent like basically my entire career thinking about it. I've kind of gone from, I've been on different parts of that spectrum, and I'm still kind of trying to find my way. But let's start with, I just want to just kind of like opening comments, and I'm going to just pass it to you guys for any general thoughts that you have before we go into specifics. But we just want to remind everyone, like this has never been like an anti-pro-life movement podcast, okay? Like we know that the people that we're going to be talking about today probably all mean well. They all hate abortion just as much as we do. And they're trying to fight it in kind of the way that they feel like it's going to be the most effective. Now, I think we're going to basically disagree with all of the tactics that we're talking about here. We think they are not as effective, but these people don't realize that. So it's not like that they're bad people. It's not that they're mean or something like that or stupid. It's just we're coming from different places. And but I think, like none of the people are doing these bad things like intentionally. I think they all mean well. So we're all on the same team. We're not trying to just like have like a big infighting war with other pro-lifers. But we do get asked this question all the time. And so it's time to talk about it. Emily, any other just kind of general thoughts from you before we dive in?
I think you're absolutely right that most pro-life people who are engaging in one of these behaviors aren't really doing it on purpose. They think they're being effective. And I think the real question here, and the way it's come across in a lot of the social media comments of people who've asked me this question is it really different to talk to a pro-life person you disagree with than how you'd behave for a pro-choice person you disagree with, right? And typically ERI is talking to pro-life people about how to engage with pro-choice people and pro-choice people that are using different ways of explaining their position, and maybe they're being hostile towards you or whatever, and how do you deal with that? So is talking to a pro-life person that you disagree with the same, or is it inherently different somehow? Is it okay to be more snarky with a pro-life person than you would with a pro-choice person? Those are kind of all the questions here, but I think it relates to how we at ERI teach people to engage with pro-choice people as well.
And I think that's a super interesting question. Should you engage with other pro-lifers differently than pro-choice people? So we will definitely get to that. Monica and then Andrew, any general thoughts from both of you?
Yes, I wanted to emphasize a point of commonality. So there are a lot of pro-life people who approach things in a way that I wouldn't, or even have arguments I wouldn't use. But I try to keep in mind that they're still coming from the subset of people who care enough about this to try to do anything. Most people...
Yeah.
At SPL, we're trying to get people on the fence more involved. We're trying to get people that are on the fence leaning pro-choice to think about our view, and people that are on the fence leaning pro-life to do something about it. So everybody we're about to talk about today, they're already to the point where they care enough to try to do anything. And as far as I'm concerned, that very much gives us some common ground. And that actually draws from a smaller subset of people. And I admire people who care enough to bother to try, even if the way that they're trying, I don't necessarily think is the way that I would do it. I also think that, and we can talk more about it in a second, but as far as the question of, do you approach pro-life people differently than pro-choice? If your goal is to persuade, whether it's about pro-life or pro-choice or abortion or something else, a lot of the tactics will be the same. So if you are trying to convince someone of a view they don't hold, whether it's to be pro-life or to be pro-life in a different way, I think it is going to be very similar, actually.
Yeah, that's basically my view too, I think. Andrew?
Yeah, I think so because of both my bent and kind of my training, I have less dialogue experience, I think, than everyone else on this podcast. So I like to think that my main qualification for talking about difficult pro-lifers is having been one.
Wow.
This is great.
Humility
Talk
time.
about that.
Okay.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, my first published pro-life writing, I did things that I quickly learned were not great or effective moves, like making a Holocaust comparison, because I wanted to just convey the scale.
Right.
And it's like,
me too. I've done that.
Yep, that backfires. Also, I just am a more confrontational person by nature. Not because I enjoy confrontation, or at least not as much as I did back then, but because I'm just like, well, but you can't shrink from it. You have to be willing to say the hard things. And dozen or so years later, I've got a little bit more perspective about how best to do that. And I hope at least that that's helped me to engage with people who are difficult sometimes, or who don't realize quite what they're doing, in a way that is helpful to them.
Well, I will say also, in your defense, Andrew, you have a lot of experience dealing with difficult pro-life people, because you've been having to deal with a lot of the ones on our Facebook page for quite a while. So like in the ERI history, like in the very beginning, I was the one dealing with all the comments. That was completely me for probably the first couple of years. And then at some point I delegated that to Tim and Rachel, because I was getting too busy with like speaking and stuff. And they kind of hated it. Not kind of. They really hated it. And
it's not that shocking.
Right.
I don't like it either.
Yeah.
No one wants to have that job.
So then at some point, then there was Rachel and Andrew, and then Emily came on. And then I was basically like, let's have Emily do as much of this as possible. And I think you're still punting to Andrew every once in a while for like the really philosophical ones or whatever. But pretty much, if ERI responds to one of your comments, almost definitely that is Emily. And so everyone has had some experience, even just online, of dealing with people who really don't like what we're doing, or don't like an argument that we're making or whatever. In common, they want to make sure that we know that, and make sure that everyone else knows the way that they think about it. So we've had some experience on social media, as well as, I mean, we've had to deal with this in person too. I've dealt with very, very annoying pro-life people at outreach. I've told this story before about Gabriel. Like that was literally his name. He's not the angel. It's just a different thing. At Portland Community College, he was like, it was so annoying and super confrontational and really smug and condescending in the way that he talked to pro-choice people. Like I had never done this before. I actually tried to trick him into getting away from our outreach, like act like he didn't have the right to be there, which he totally saw through. And he hated me so much that he hung out just to spite me for like 4 hours. And just like, it was a thing. So like, we've had to deal with people both trying different things, trying to figure out what works, what's effective, as well as deal with them online.
Wait, quick question.
Yeah.
Does ERI have a policy of having to respond to your social media comments? It sounds like you guys put a lot of effort into it. That is a good question.
So I have, generally speaking, at least until, I don't know if I've had to do it that much since Emily got here, but certainly before Emily came on, I have been the main one saying we should be responding at least to some comments. And there have been some staff that will go, I won't name, they've been like, why are we responding
calling himself out
to any of these people? Like, why aren't we just making the things? And there's me just mainly coming from when we started ERI, I was paying attention to like other, like outside the pro-life movement, like big, content creators, bloggers, people like Michael Hyatt and stuff like that. People who are running small businesses, just trying to figure out what kind of strategy is going to bring to the pro-life movement that maybe a lot of groups have been lacking. And so one of those things that I felt like I learned from those guys is like, this is Web 2.0. People expect you to interact with them. And if there's a comment section of your blog, it's weird to not respond. Like, just take out your comment section if you just want to post articles, but like, then you're kind of saying, we just want you to hear from us. We have nothing to say to you. So I didn't want people to feel like that. And so I've been the main guy, like, we ought to respond to some comments, but then for sure, it's always a struggle. It's like Emily and I were just talking before everyone got online about, now Emily, we've added TikTok now. So now we're doing TikTok.
Go follow us on TikTok.
Go
please.
follow us on TikTok. I can't believe I'm saying out loud that we're on TikTok now, but things have changed. So we're on TikTok and Instagram. And so you're spending a lot of time making those things, and we're seeing really good results right away. And you've kind of figured, okay, it is definitely more important for me to be making this stuff than responding to every comment. So I'd say now what? You're like picking and choosing?
Yes, I respond to really thoughtful comments. I respond to things that I think maybe do need clarity, like it really wasn't explained that well, and whatever the piece was, if it was a blog article or whatever. If someone's asking something that's really easily answered in the piece of material, I'm not going to respond to that.
Yep.
I think it also depends on which platform we're on. So platforms that are getting a lot more engagement, if there's a lot of people I can see that are, seeing this particular post, whatever that is, getting a lot of likes, whatever, that automatically bumps it up my priority. So if you've made a comment on one of our pieces and I didn't respond, I'm sorry. I don't have time to respond to everybody. And yours was not on the top of my priority list clearly that day, but that's nothing against you or necessarily your comment. I will say one of my other favorite things to see is when other pro-lifers who clearly follow our content, are clearly familiar with our material, will jump in and respond to questions for me.
Yeah.
You cannot understand how happy that makes me. So if you are one of those people, I'm applauding you right now. And if you are one of those people that could be doing that, please be doing that. Yeah. It is so helpful because I don't have all the time in the world, A, and B, it also means more coming from other pro-life people, I think, than from this generic, like, who is actually responding to the ERI comments? Like, it's way more personal if a pro-life person is able to respond to a real pro-choice person's comments or something like that.
Monica, what is the secular pro-life policy? Do you guys respond to your comments? Do you respond to all of them? None of them? What do you guys do?
There's no official policy. It's whatever we want to do. But 90 to 95% of the time, if secular pro-life is responding to you, it's me. And I actually try to spend a lot less time responding to comments. I'm very tempted to do it regularly, and then I find myself getting sucked into these conversations, and all these other things I need to be doing just never end up happening. And that would be okay depending on the context. So my rule of thumb is not unlike Emily's. First of all, the more I believe a lot of people will see the conversation, the more open I am to having it. I've had people say, let's move this to private. And I'm like, absolutely not. I don't care at all. Sorry. And secondly, there are two kinds of pro-choice. Well, actually pro-choice or pro-life. There's two kinds of comments I think are worth debating. And the first one is particularly thought-provoking or interesting or intelligent arguments. And the second one is particularly common ones. And they may or may not be the same. They're usually not. But if you see something that comes up so often that even if you think it's ridiculous or obvious, it might not be to everybody. And if it comes up frequently enough, it's worth addressing. But even then, usually what I try to do is figure out my response and make it original content, not a comment response. As far as the individual people I'm talking to, I'm very much of the philosophy that the person I'm talking to online is not going to change their mind, but the people reading might. So I'm always thinking of it in terms of how persuasive I am to the audience that I think is there. And so I try to stay pretty dispassionate, automatically link to sources, be relatively respectful. I might get a little snarky if the other person is, but I try not to do that too much. But there are rare occasions where the person I'm talking to themselves, I think, might be pliable. And that's what suckers me in, is if they're really polite. It doesn't even matter if their argument is good or not. If they're really polite and I think they're sincere. So 2 things. If they're really polite and I think they're sincere, I will go much longer, sometimes on and off for weeks, before I decide whether to drop it or not.
Too.
But it does.
If you're polite, you have a better chance of getting a response.
Oh yeah, but it doesn't happen very often, frankly. I actually think responding to comments is useful exactly as far as it lets other pro-lifers who are watching you get information, and otherwise not so much. I don't feel any obligation to respond just because you're on my platform or just because we have a comment section at all. Not at all. And we also have an active enough community that usually I don't even need to respond and somebody else will usually. Yeah. Now, whether their response is what I would have said, I don't know. maybe not. But it's just very, very time consuming. There has to be an added incentive other than just the politeness of having a platform. It's just, there's no way you could have 4 people do that all the time, just them. In fact, our volunteers who repost our content to Instagram, Reddit, and a couple other places, I gave them specific instructions to literally never respond to any comments at all. Just don't even bother. And that liberates them to put the content up and go do something else. So
sometimes there's a time thing too. So like something that's happened for me is, I remember Michael Hyatt, I think at some point had said, like, even if you've got like a couple hundred comments, try just responding to a few people. Give a few people what you wish that you could give to everyone, even though you can't respond to everyone. And I liked that idea. And so, but it's just as I've gotten busier and busier at ERI, and as my kind of task list has grown, I am having to do that less. So like, I'm so bothered by something that happened last year where Jonathan Van Maren and I recorded these 2 podcasts about abolishing human abortion. Those are out. We'll link to them in the show notes if you're interested. But I think Jonathan seems to be like the biggest expert on AHA, and I'd gotten a lot of questions about AHA, and we finally decided to do a couple of podcasts about it. So there was a kid from AHA that reached out to me, and I think he was like 16 or 17. It looks like it was like a homeschool kid, super polite, super respectful, emails me and says, I watched the shows. I appreciated some of the things you said. I'm not convinced by some of the things. Would you be willing to have a dialogue with me? And I've just kind of generally had a rule of like, don't debate with AHA people. But like, I was just like, he seems so sincere. It goes back to that Monica thing. It's like, if you're really polite, it suckers me. And you're so polite. And so I told him, okay, if this is just between us, Monica and I are different. I was like, I don't want this going to AHA leadership. Like, I don't have the time to edit these at the level that I would if we were having a public debate. But if this is just between you and me, I'm interested in having a dialogue. And unfortunately, after a couple of back and forths, I got too busy. And I really wish I wasn't. Like, I feel bad every time I think about this kid that I kind of...
But it's kind of a huge honor that you spent that much time on an individual person. I'm not trying to be rude, but we talked to thousands of people, thousands of people, a week or a month or whatever. I have this guy on Twitter. I muted him a long time ago. I mute so many people on Twitter, just like hundreds of people. I don't block anybody. But as soon as I see that their arguments are too insincere or too repetitive or too dumb, I'm like, I can't read. I don't have time for this. But there was this one guy where he would comment, and if I didn't respond within like 30 minutes, he assumed I was afraid to respond to him. I don't even check Twitter more than once a day sometimes. Seriously. And when I do, I don't respond to most people. The audacity. Yep. Like, I just...
We had a person like that on Instagram about 3 months ago that I was forced to do that to because they had the exact same thing. If I did not respond within 30 minutes, there was a series of about 5 more comments accusing me of not having the guts.
You're the only person in the world. Are you kidding me?
Do I do anything else in my day?
Yeah. Also, your arguments are terrible. Like, why? What's in it for me? I don't get it. So... Anyway,
analytics are what's in it for us. That's
seriously. So, okay. So Everett's getting an interesting behind the scenes glimpse of a couple of pro-life organizations, which is a fun thing that I wasn't even expecting to happen. Before we get into some like how to deal with this stuff, we all have some thoughts about how to deal with the difficult pro-lifers. Let's get specific. So we've all come up collectively with a list of 8 types of difficult pro-life people that we want to kind of specifically kind of note, like, here are some kind of examples of things. Maybe if you do this, maybe maybe don't do this. Maybe it's not as effective as you think it is. So apologies if you are in this list. I'm not trying to offend you, but at the same time, maybe reconsider what you do. So 8 types of difficult pro-lifers. So 1, the biblical one. These are the people who won't stop quoting Bible verses at you, and it is their only argument against abortion. So like I referenced, like there are sidewalk counselors or clinic protesters who have a bullhorn, and basically the only thing they're doing is yelling Bible verses. And maybe occasionally things like don't murder babies or like something like that. And they feel like, hey, the Bible basically says that, if you quote it, it's not gonna return void. Like it's gonna be like this like intrinsically powerful thing. And then they're just yelling Bible verses at people. And I'm not going to say it never works. I think people are super complicated. So I think all those guys have probably a couple of anecdotes of a time where it worked. Some Christian was walking into the clinic and he said this Bible verse and he felt convicted and decided to not have the abortion. I'm just saying it is not going to be the thing that works the most often. It is not very appealing to most people, especially if we're talking to pro-choice people who don't believe in the Bible. Any other thoughts on this one?
It's not just about if it didn't work. It can also work backwards. You could be undermining the work other people are doing. I did want to say, though, it's ironic because, we're with secular pro-life and our whole thing is to remove religion from it. I never see pro-lifers quoting the Bible. Never.
That's so interesting.
At all. I mean, I suppose if we did sidewalk counseling, I might, but in terms of our platforms, I won't say literally never. Every now and then somebody will bring something up, but usually if they do at all, it's in direct response to us mentioning pro-choice Christians. So I feel like it kind of got brought up already.
Sure.
And like never to us ever.
Yeah.
In fact, it got to the point where I was wondering if that was just kind of an exaggeration made up by pro-choicers because they always complain about pro-lifers. But it's selection bias. That we have a lot of Christians that follow us, but they're the kinds of Christians interested in advancing secular arguments. And so we're just the circle we run in. We've like created this buffer of secular people and the types of Christians who want to do secular arguments. We just don't see it as often at all.
Yeah. I don't think this happens super often anymore. I think this was more common 10 or 20 years ago. I've definitely seen it online too. I remember at some point I grabbed screenshots. I don't think I ever put it in my faulty pro-life arguments talk, but I think I had plans to. I definitely based one of my faulty pro-life. I was like, the Bible's pro-life is like a faulty pro-life argument. It's not terribly persuasive. And I had screenshots of someone, I don't remember what, I think it was on Live Access page. And all they were doing was Bible verse stuff in response, like a back and forth with a pro-choice person. And finally, the pro-choice person basically said, this is not a theocracy. Like, I need better arguments from you than just Bible verses because we don't base our laws directly on Bible verses. Like, it's not convincing to me. Try something else. And then the conversation just went away. So it definitely happens. I hope it happens less often than it used to. I think more and more, especially younger pro-life advocates, just kind of know this is not going to be the most effective way to reach a non-Christian. But it certainly happens.
I also wonder if it happens more in person than online, maybe.
I think so. I've definitely seen it at Outreach a lot.
Yes, I've seen it at Outreach a lot as well.
I was just going to say, I think that the context is definitely a part of it because I run into this, even if it's not directly, we're just going to say Bible verses to people who are pro-choice. It's very clearly their reason for being pro-life is just that they believe that a couple Bible verses justify a pro-life position, or that like the only real argument for them is, well, we were created in the image of God. And it's a very much like, in a church Sunday school class, for better or for worse, that's kind of the attitude. And maybe it's because it's an older demographic as well. That's the place where I primarily see it.
I think it's important that we be very clear about what we're saying and what we're not saying here. Yeah. If you are a pro-life Christian, you should still know what the Bible says about abortion.
Sure.
And I have several articles, materials, stuff with the Pastor Pledge, where we want to make it very clear that if you are a Christian and you're talking to pro-choice Christians, like, you should know what the Bible says about abortion. We can be very clear about what the Bible says about abortion. The problem is when people use that as their only argument.
Yep.
And to Christians who are not pro-life,
Right.
And that is the only thing they've got. And that's the reason they think that abortion should be illegal, but we don't live in a theocracy, as you said. So we do think it's important for Christians to know what the Bible says about abortion and to be equipped to talk about that. But that should not be even close to your only argument. And if it comes across like that's your only argument, no one's going to take you seriously.
It's this weird thing where, again, like a lot of times I just try to help pro-lifers like understand, like, what if this was done to you? What if a Muslim person came to you and said, I'm going to prove that your religion is wrong just with the Quran? Okay, let's open up and let's read together. Like, you are probably not going to be convinced because you probably, unlike him, don't think the Quran is like this kind of perfectly inspired book and completely accurate, right? And so that's not going to be convincing to you. If you bring an atheist, Psalm 139 and Jeremiah 1:5 and John the Baptist kicking in his mother's womb in the presence of first trimester Jesus, it is just not that convincing of an argument if they don't think that the Bible is the inspired word of God.
When pro-life Christians try to talk to pro-choice Christians, from what I've seen, a lot of times the pro-choice Christians, either they will argue about what the Bible says, or they'll say, well, yeah, I personally agree with you, but we can't push that on other people. And so at least in the circles I run in, I've very rarely seen biblical arguments be helpful in almost any context. But again, I also hardly ever see them get brought up. So I don't know.
Fair.
Yeah, I think I've written a little bit about the kind of disagreements about how to handle and interpret text that lead to usually more theologically liberal people who identify as Christian kind of denigrating the biblical text when it doesn't suit a pro-choice argument. And also, quick response video 21, link in description.
Okay, Emily, tell us about the second type of difficult pro-life person.
Okay, this is a fun one. We've all seen this before.
Yep.
It is the misogynistic pro-lifer, or the one who comes across as misogynistic. I truly don't think that any of the pro-life people who are behaving like this actually think that women are lesser, or they actually like want to have a patriarchal society in like the worst sense, and they want Handmaid's Tale.
I don't know.
Does anyone actually want Handmaid's Tale?
Not Handmaid's Tale. That's a straw man. But certainly there are Christians who are coming from a patriarchal view of how the family ought to be or something like that. And I think that sometimes comes through in their comments.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair, Josh.
There's some from both. I think it's true that some come across more misogynistic than they actually are, and then there's some. Yeah.
I have a distinct memory of this happening at my very first ERI style outreach. People have heard the crazy story of my college campus and how all of my club learned the ERI course. And we went out and we did our very first outreach with no one from ERI there. Like, we just learned the materials by ourselves. And very first one, there was this elderly white man. I don't know who he was. I don't think he worked for the college. I think he was just like wandering around our campus or something. And he came over while we had several conversations with some young pro-choice feminists happening. And he said very loudly to me that, well, this all just wouldn't be a problem if women could just keep their legs closed because all women are whores. And I was like,
Well, he said the second part literally.
He literally said, you're quoting, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I was like, what do I do? Like, this is my very first
This was
outreach.
not in the Equip for Life course.
What do I do? And so I've got several young pro-choice women who are hearing this. And I'm like, first of all, I'm going to get associated with that automatically because they know that I'm pro-life. And there tends to be a stereotype of the, pro-lifers are similar. You're all the same. Exactly. Yeah. And here is a literal stereotypical old white pro-life man spewing misogynistic things. And I'm like, what? That is so unhelpful.
What'd you do?
I kind of like pulled him to the side of the table. I managed to let my other people continue their conversations, but I purposely didn't want
him. I'm surprised.
I didn't want to take him so far away that it would like I wanted other people to maybe be able to hear this.
Yeah.
And I explained how I didn't think that was helpful. Basically, I said, I definitely think that people need to be responsible about having sex. Okay, no one, pro-life or pro-choice, is arguing that we should have irresponsible sex. And it's a thing that a lot of pro-choice people will talk about. They think that we should have better access to contraceptives and people should be more aware and all of those things. Like, everybody agrees people should be responsible about that.
Right.
But even when that happens, like, we're still going to get pregnancies that are happening when women aren't being whores. Like, you're going to get unplanned pregnancies in marriage.
Right.
And you're going to get unplanned pregnancies because of rape. And so that argument, beyond being horribly misogynistic, it does not even answer the abortion question.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even do that. And so I was able to kind of very calmly talk to him. And I also brought in a little bit of common ground there of being like, I am a Christian. Like, I was willing to go there and be like, I have a feeling I get where you're coming from here, but I don't think that's helpful, and here's why.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I changed his mind to not be like that, but I did get him to go away and to never bother our table again.
Yay.
So, unfortunately, there are pro-life people out there like that who will say statements.
Is a real thing. So I really identify with the feeling that you had, which was like, holy crap, what do I do right now? What do I do? Because I was at a conference one time. I'm not going to say what the conference was, but it was at a pro-life conference. I gave I don't remember what speech. I think it was faulty pro-life arguments and tactics, ironically. And I finished up the speech, and it's like a workshop at a conference. It's a mainly old white crowd. And so I'm finishing, I'm gathering my laptop and stuff off the stage, and this really, really old woman is like slowly walking up to me. And so I have a very certain expectation in my mind, because this happens to me all the time. It doesn't happen to me as much now that I look older. But back, back when I looked younger than I do now, I would have this common experience where old people come up to me and be like, I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. You give me hope. Like, I just love seeing the young people get involved.
Now you don't give them hope anymore because you got a beard.
I don't give them as much hope anymore. Now that I'm almost 40 at this point.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just not getting that comment anymore. So I'm expecting that, which is why it was even more shocking to me when literally the first words out of her mouth, it wasn't hi, it wasn't nice speech. It was, if women didn't dress so slutty, then maybe they wouldn't get raped so much. And I was like, now there's other people around.
Yikes.
And I'm like, she's probably in the last 30 of these conferences. Like, I think she's probably like a known entity. And I'm just like,
what do I do?
So I went from like level 10 and just brought myself down to like level 5. But I very, very firmly looked at her and said, please don't ever say that again. This is not the reason women are getting raped. To say I'm sick of hearing people say this because they were at that place or they had that drink or like all that stuff. Let's not be blaming the survivors of rape. Let's be blaming rapists. Like, I said something like that and walked away. But oh my gosh, like it exists and it is horrible. And I would think it's going away. Just as like as more and more pro-life advocates are younger. I don't expect that to hear that from a 20-year-old pro-lifer. I'm sorry. Like, it's just.
Right. I agree. I've never heard it from anyone that was under the age of 60.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just a stereotype, but I've never heard it from anyone under the age of 60.
And most older pro-lifers would never say it either. I know that. Right. I'm just saying, like, there's a certain demographic.
Well, I mean, on one hand, that specific sentiment, I think, is mostly limited to old people, but you do get the men's rights activist types.
Yeah.
And I watched you have to deal with one of those at a conference.
Man, remind me.
Yeah,
it was
I don't even when I was in DC with you a few years back, and there was a middle-aged guy this time. I know there are more like younger guys into that now with the very online types, but he just came over and he was talking about how like the abortion like was a men's rights thing, and like why should men be paying child support, and if they don't have any rights over the fetus. And
I've completely blocked this out of my memory. What did I do, Andrew?
I mean, you were stuck talking to him for probably a solid 45 to 60 minutes. I don't think you managed to extricate yourself because he just kept like he came back. Like you talked with him, you tried to get him away, and then he just came back. And so I'm just not as optimistic that it's going to go softly into that good night.
Well, some of those flavors are, I mean, this child support thing, I see pro-choicers make that argument where basically if they say if we're going to be consistent, maybe they shouldn't have to pay child support. And I don't think it's, I guess it depends on how they're saying it, but I've definitely seen that before. I've seen pro-choice women say that, where it's like,
Yeah.
there should be the same time period where you can back out if we're going to be consistent kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a totally different thing. Like,
Right.
It makes sense. Like, the more, the pro-life people point out and say, look, we want it to be equal. As equal as possible. Obviously, there is a biological inequality. Pregnancy is just way harder on women than it is men, and that's just like a biological reality. But we should try as much as we can to balance out the scales, and men should pay child support and all of this stuff. And I think more and more I'm seeing pro-choice people just like to kind of neutralize that argument, just being like, hey, maybe both women and men should be able to basically opt out of parenting altogether, even after the pregnancy has begun. So
at least that's a consistent argument.
Yes,
like
that's totally different.
It's totally different.
I can't think of any experience I've had where people say anything close to as terrible as what you guys just said. And if I have, it's been online, which I don't count. And actually, it's usually been it's usually been from pro-choice people, and it's usually been along the lines of people often think I'm a man online. If I'm talking through secular pro-life, especially on Twitter, it happens all the time where they use he, him pronouns, and I'm like, I'm a woman. Why'd you think I was a man? And I talk regularly about my pregnancies and my miscarriages and other experiences that would imply that I'm a woman. But sometimes when they find out I'm a woman, then they'll say really misogynistic things. But I don't think that's really what they think. I think they're just mad at me. You know what I mean?
Why are they mad at you in that situation?
It's the same reason they get mad when they find out we're atheists. They're the kind of pro-choice people who are focusing on very like identity politics based arguments. And they just assume we fit those. And then when we don't, instead of being able to pivot, they just get mad at us for that.
They just spew at you. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it happens a lot. It happens to everybody. But anyway, that's a tangent from this topic. I was just trying to think. I can't think of any time a pro-lifer has directed at me. We've had some comments over the years where people say, keep your legs closed or other such things. I've actually changed our settings to where if certain words are said, they're just automatically hidden. I'm just not going to even do it. But I think the way you responded, Josh, is exactly
we should maybe do that too more.
Yeah, maybe we should.
I think it's important when that happens to just say, like, I completely disagree and I don't even want to argue about it. It's so inappropriate what you just said. And it's important not only because it's true, but also because it helps for the people that you're talking to and around for them to see that we're not all the same and we don't all feel that way at all. In fact,
that's a really interesting point that I hadn't even thought about. And so like, I know we're going to talk later after we talk about the 8 types, like, like general kind of tips and stuff, but like that idea that like, I think basically like there's this threshold where a lot of people below the threshold, let's call it the obnoxiousness threshold or whatever. Like you can kind of like, it's optional. Like, are you going to deal with this or are you going to respond to it or not? Or are you just going to like, let it go? But there's some kind of like, once you're past this line of behavior, it's like, this ought to be called out. Someone hearing this ought to be saying, that's messed up. That's wrong. You should be ashamed of yourself. Like whatever it is.
For Emily and me specifically, I'm going to say something because I'm a woman and I can hear you. Like, do you think that this only applies to the women that politically disagree with you? Are you serious right now? Good Lord. Yeah. Just, that's not, I think the way you responded was correct. Again, online, you don't want to spend too much time because there's endless examples of people being absurd online and I just can't, but yeah, the same principles. If there's a lot of people looking at it or if it's particularly interesting, which it won't be, or if it's particularly common, it might be worth. And usually I won't engage in a way where I'm going to actually have a debate about it because I'm not. But I will say something, especially as the page, like we completely disagree. Maybe like here's something we've written about it before, but that's super inappropriate. And I don't need your help. So
yeah, I don't need your help. I like that. All right, type 3, not Enneagram type 3, but like the obnoxious pro-lifer type 3. I know. Okay, these are the people that are dismissive and reductive about the serious effects of pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing. Emily, talk to us about what that ends up looking like in real life.
I literally just had this about 2 days ago.
No way.
I did a speech. And after this particular speech, there was an individual that came up to me and we were talking about my speech and was very complimentary. And then he said something like, really, women should just automatically always be willing to go through pregnancy, because pregnancy is not hard at all. Really,
Oh my gosh.
it might be uncomfortable for you for like the last 2 months, but the whole beginning of pregnancy is incredibly easy. And so I can't believe that there are women that make such a big deal about how hard pregnancy is.
How old was this person?
Like 60.
Oh, yeah, how old
Probably
was this, a guy?
like a 60-year-old. Yes, this is a male.
I don't
It's
care
like a
how old they
60-year-old
are.
male.
It doesn't matter. Like,
Oh no!
doesn't-
In my mind, it's okay. If he's 60, then presumably, if he has been around pregnancy, it just seems like I would expect that more from like a 15-year-old like pro-life newbie.
Yes, but hypothetically, he would have been around people who've been pregnant, and maybe he got really lucky. Like his wife had super easy pregnancies.
super
That's
Right.
skeptical
possible,
about
right?
that. Super skeptical about that. Okay. I think it's more likely he has his idea of how it is and he filters everything else. I mean, I don't know this particular person,
Yeah. Right.
but I've known men like this before, and they're not all really old either.
Mhm.
This is one of my favorites, actually. I say as someone
to
who's
us about it.
currently in the 3rd trimester of my 4th pregnancy as we speak.
Mhm. Congratulations.
Thank you. I will say, and I'm very, very pro-life, and I definitely think that abortion is wrong, but also, personal opinion here, pregnancy sucks.
Yeah.
Okay. I do it because I want to have babies, just like you study for finals because you want to get a degree. But just because you want to get the degree doesn't mean that you have to love studying for finals. You get what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And in my first pregnancy in 2015, I was very unhappy physically and slightly psychologically, mostly physically. And I actually wrote a blog post, we still reference it sometimes, where I just went through the body systems and just explained the way a normal, healthy pregnancy affects each and every body system. Because people will say, oh, well, they're using your womb, they're using your uterus for 9 months, which is reductive in several ways because it affects your entire body in annoying ways, even when it's normal. If you weren't pregnant and you had all these symptoms, people would think something was very wrong, right? And so I totally agree that that's not sufficient to kill a human being. And we can recognize simultaneously that pregnancy is not as serious as killing somebody. That doesn't mean it's unimportant. And it doesn't mean you have to reduce how uncomfortable it is to have this conversation. And I feel very pointed about this because I don't like being pregnant. In the first trimester, you're just, you know what? I'm not going to drag you through all the ways that it's annoying. I could go on for a long time, but it's not just physical, it's psychological too, because if you're used to having a certain amount of physical ability and it rapidly changes and decreases a lot, that's hard, especially for people who are really active or people who like to get a lot of things done. And all of a sudden you're limited very severely in all these ways. And again, not enough to justify killing somebody, but still serious. And so when people talk about, I don't like the phrase 9 months of inconvenience. I get the point they're trying to make. They're trying to contrast what you will have to sacrifice versus what you're costing if you get an abortion. I understand that. But we can also recognize, and this isn't even getting into childbirth or postpartum or the non-physical effects of having a child when you're not ready, which are all also serious. But just pregnancy itself, even for wanted planned pregnancies, I'm in a stable relationship, it's still very resource intensive, and we don't need to act like it's not to make our point. And if anything, when we do, it makes it sound like either we have no experience or we really don't care what women go through. Just for myself, just purely for myself and not specific to the debate, when I read other pro-lifers saying that it's not that big of a deal and it's just an inconvenience, I get annoyed for myself. I don't just feel inconvenienced. I feel like my whole life is upended for 9 to 12 months. And I chose that. That's okay. But it's not that minimal. And so our response is to link to that blog post. Send
me the blog post. We definitely want to link
called
to
it.
We should be
linking
linking
to
that.
inconvenience. Yeah. And to just say, listen, you can be very serious about abortion and also recognize this. And again, the blog post is only talking about healthy pregnancies. I'm not even getting, because a lot of times pro-choicers will respond with a list of all the most serious, scary effects that pregnancy can have. And I get what they're saying, but I'm saying even without that, just in the regular sense, even the likely responses still are a lot, and you don't need to act like they're not.
Right.
I wonder if a lot of times this thing happens when like pro-life people, we sort of like, we're reacting to pro-choice people, sometimes like acting like, that pregnancy is this more like there are pro-choice philosophers who have like compared being pregnant to like to rape and like comparing the embryo or the fetus to like this little rapist
and saying that every single pregnancy is like a self-defense. You need to be protecting yourself,
right?
Because you are going to die in every single pregnancy.
So when you get a pro-life group of, let's say, all religious pro-lifers together, and they are just like, they feel very strongly about how just like pregnancy is this like beautiful gift from God kind of a thing, then I imagine then they can then overreact and then end up acting like pregnancy is just always amazing. But like, I think sometimes like they're making naturalistic fallacies where it's like, hey, pregnancy is this natural thing. Like, so therefore it's basically wonderful. It's like, hey, that's not the case always. I remember one older pro-life person, he was a cell counselor. He told me that he thought pregnancy was no big deal because his wife, they were Catholic, his wife, they had at least 8 kids. I don't remember how many kids, but it was at least, it might have been in the double digits. And he was like, hey, by the time we had our last kid, she felt almost nothing, like almost no pain. It was totally fine. I'm like, dude, your wife's the exception. Like that is not the normal pregnancy experience. And you should not be saying that to pro-choice people.
No one is going to take your pro-life argument seriously if you can't acknowledge the serious difficulties that women face in pregnancy. And I mean that both in like how difficult an unplanned pregnancy can be financially and psychologically and in the rest of your life and all those things, but also just literally how hard pregnancy is. If you can't acknowledge that, no, why would anyone take what you have to say seriously? Because clearly you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I know we've been saying, and we're not even going to talk about labor, but I want to talk about labor because
Go ahead.
I don't want to let pro-life guys off the hook as a young pro-life guy who was in the room for a 26-hour labor, my wife with our firstborn. And when I say that, I don't mean like, it was like the, nice part of labor, the theoretical less bad part.
Which part is that?
The part where you're not completely doubled over, I think. But like, it was hard labor for literally all but the time we drove to the hospital.
Wow.
And so like, I don't do well with this, watching, the person you care most about in like unmanageable pain. And like, I'm white as a sheet and I'm not the one doing anything. And I'm just in the room. I'm on ginger ale duty because that's all I can handle. And she's pushing out a baby.
Right.
And like, even if pregnancy were a complete like walk in the park for 9 months, if it didn't like rearrange your internal organs, it would still end in labor or a C-section, which is major surgery. And like, either way, like that alone, that one thing, which like, found out we're pregnant with our second born child. And all I can think about is, oh my goodness, at the end of 9 months, there is this thing.
Right.
And it's a scary thing.
We have to do that all over again. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's when everything goes right.
So Monica, tell us about the Christian apologist who just constantly wants to be debating, atheism, agnosticism versus Christianity whenever you say a thing.
Yes. So it is more common in person than online. In fact, I think it's invariable in person. At some point, somebody does this. And it depends a little bit on their tenor. Their arguments are all the same, which is essentially that you need God to have objective morality. And so without God, there's no objective morality. And without objective morality, how can you argue to make abortion illegal or argue anything, really? That's the general argument. There's 3 kinds of people who do this. There's the people who I think have just never been around an atheist in person, and they just genuinely are kind of excited about the opportunity to have this conversation with someone who actually disagrees instead of just amongst themselves. And I appreciate that. I understand wanting to get out of your echo chamber. I think they just don't understand how many people say this to us.
You're not the first.
Then there is the person who is trying to save me. And so their motivation is good, and they're even coming from kind of like a sweet place, like not necessarily hostile or aggressive, just they think that they're giving me these thought-provoking questions I've never heard before, and they're hoping that either now or in the future it'll bring me around to Christianity because they care about my soul. And then there's the person who is hostile, and it's like they are offended that I am an atheist, And they think that when I say I'm an atheist, I'm attacking them. And they will be more aggressive. It's still the same argument, but they'll be more aggressive. Like, well, why does anything mean anything then? Well, what even is the point? So there's different flavors of it. It's all the same argument though. And I find all of them annoying. The last one's the worst, but it's irritating to me because I don't do pro-life work to convince people to be atheists. I genuinely don't care how you feel about that. Like we say that sometimes on our website and our work, we don't care what you believe as long as you're with us. I can't overemphasize enough. I don't care. Okay. I don't need other people to be atheists. If you are, then we have more common ground.
Sure.
It's kind of relaxing, but I'm here to get more people to be pro-life, not atheist. And there's no way to have a conversation about how we ground our morality without it becoming a religious debate. And I'm specifically trying to build interfaith coalitions of people who want to advance secular arguments. And when people bring up this debate to me, first of all, there's no way for me to have it without alienating everyone around us, because the only way for me to explain my position on this is to also explain why I don't think Christianity is true, which I hope everyone understands that as an atheist, I don't think Christianity is true, or I would be a Christian. And so I don't want to talk about that. I specifically don't want to talk about that. I don't need Christians to stop being Christian. I appreciate that faith motivates a lot of people to do the work I want them to do, which is fighting abortion. I'm trying to build coalitions. I'm trying to build more partnerships. There's no benefit to me to convince you that I'm right. And there's no benefit to me to fail to convince you that I'm right, because then you think my position doesn't make sense. And I just have no desire to talk about it at all. So our general response is to say, this isn't actually something that we will discuss. We consider it a religious debate. It's not part of our mission. It actually undermines our mission. And so I'm not interested in the conversation. And nobody has ever, they can't make me talk about it. But some people have still been pretty angry at that response because they think that I am afraid of how right they are, or, I don't know. I don't care. It frustrates me because we're at a conference or a rally or a dinner or whatever about abortion. We're here to fight abortion. And it comes off to me as caring more about arguing about religion than about working together on abortion. And it's very frustrating too, because I know a lot of secular pro-lifers and a lot of them will not participate. They will not do activist work. They will not get involved. And part of the reason for that is this. And I also find that Christians who do this, they tend to assume I don't know anything about Christianity. I was raised Catholic. I was Catholic for a large portion of my life. My mom is Catholic. They assume we have no exposure. They also assume that we are happy to be atheists, or that it's a glib thing for us, which is true for some people and not for others. And I get it. They're exposed to the loudest, most vocal atheists are of a certain flavor. And they think that's all of atheism. And I don't really blame them, because how would they know otherwise, But they assume a lot about my personal life and my background and how I feel about this. And if I want to talk about it with strangers, all in addition to changing the subject from trying to form alliances about abortion. They make it harder for me to bring secular people out. It does come up on our social media profile, and usually it comes up when we say anything about being atheist. To be clear, most of the Christians who follow us are very supportive. And when we say anything about being atheist, they're usually like, we're so glad you're here. We're so glad to work together. So this is by no means the most common response, but it is a consistent response where somebody will be angry or wryly amused or annoyed when we talk about being atheist, because if you get down to it, your position really doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm glad you're here, but it doesn't make any sense why you're here. We've had people say that at conferences on stage.
Gosh. Wow.
We've had people say that to us. Yeah. It's like they think that if they don't clarify to their mostly Christian audience that they don't agree with atheism, then their audience will think that because they work with us, they think we're right. And it makes no sense. Nobody thinks that if I work with you, I think you're right about that. And it doesn't matter. And so it's a huge pet peeve of mine. Not everyone feels the same way. My co-tabler in Chicago, Neil, he loves talking about it. He thinks it's very interesting. And he's an atheist, and he thinks it's an interesting philosophical debate. I told him before we started, I was like, somebody's going to ask us today why we care about morality at all. At least one person will. And I was like, our official response is we're not going to talk about it. But if you really want to talk about it, you can. And he does. He likes it. And he's not annoyed. He thinks it's interesting. And it's funny because someone came up to us, a younger woman. She was probably in her mid-20s. And I was already engaged in a conversation with someone else, luckily. And I heard her ask the question. And Neil gave the generic response. And then she was pushy about it. So he went into it. I told him he could. And she was the third type, the hostile, aggressive type. She starts off with, are you just trying to promote secular arguments or are you an atheist? And he's like, yeah, I'm an atheist. And then she starts going into it. And then I hear her, they talked for a long time. And I hear her saying like the kind of, well, why does any of it matter? Why should we even care? And I don't know what he did, but by the end of it, she was like, this was such a nice conversation. And she signed up for our newsletter. So I got to talk more to Neil.
Debrief me.
He doesn't do a ton of pro-life activism, so he doesn't think of it the same way I do. But I've told Josh this before. I see it sort of like we have this Herculean, really important human rights violation that we're trying to stop. And I imagine like, suppose you're storming the beaches at Normandy and you're about to go up against this very formidable enemy and it's really difficult and you need all the resources you can get. And you stop me in the middle of it to say, well, hold on, I'm glad you're here, but like, why are you here? I think we should talk about your soul first before we finish doing this. And I'm just like, you know what? The fact that you're saying that makes me think that you're not taking this as seriously as I am. That's how I feel. Like, and I've had people overtly tell me, yeah, I do think it's more important to save your soul than to fight abortion because it's in God's hands and it's my job. And I get that at least they're blunt about it. That's fine. But I can't make them stop. We've overtly told people we don't want to talk about it. And then they're like, well, I hope you think about it. I'm like, thank you so much. And it's frustrating because I feel like we don't have the same priorities about abortion versus religion. And it's also frustrating because it tends to be extremely condescending. They assume that I'm an atheist because I haven't really thought it through. And I try to do the analogy. Imagine if roles were reversed. Imagine if there was some sort of human rights violation you cared about. And for some reason, the overwhelming majority of the movement for it were atheists.
Right.
And every time you participated, like you agree with them on this issue, but they also constantly bring up how, by the way, God's not real. And it's kind of silly to think that he is. And they constantly offer you like Christopher Hitchens' God is not great. Like, have you read this? Maybe you should read this.
Right.
And like... You have to keep filtering that out over and over and over again because you're not here to convince them of Christianity. You're here to work on this issue, but it's still kind of emotionally exhausting. So when I tell people that this behavior alienates other secular or just not very religious people, and they say, well, if they really cared about this, they'd show up. Well, easy for you to say because the movement you're participating with largely reflects what you think. So you don't have to constantly filter this out. It's a huge pet peeve of mine. I haven't thought of a better response so far than just saying, we're not going to talk about it. I'm just not going to talk about it.
Right.
And I don't like that response because it's very unsatisfying to everyone involved, but the only alternative is to get into it. And it's going to drain my resources from what I'm trying to do and actively undermine the alliances I'm trying to make. So what else can I say?
I think it's really reasonable to say that I am not interested in debating something so personal with a stranger online. Like, this is just not like, I have other people that I can talk to if I want to have a debate about Christianity. Like, those people are in my life, but you're not one of them. Like, I think that's totally reasonable.
Yeah. And I don't mind talking about it in the right context with people I'm friends with, and specifically not while I'm doing pro-life work. Like even you, Josh, are one of my best friends. And when we obviously don't agree on this issue, and I would be happy to talk to you about it. But if you came up to me while I was tabling and wanted to talk about it, I still wouldn't do it.
It would be so inappropriate of me to do it. Clearly, there's a time and place. I can't believe people don't know that.
So we went to the Dobbs oral arguments outside the Supreme Court, and my husband, who is an agnostic, was holding our secular pro-life banner, and he had 3 different people come up to him just while he was standing there and offer him a Bible and ask him if he'd consider it. He was raised Christian his entire life. His dad was a church elder. Like he has read the Bible before. It's just, I appreciate the motivation, but it's annoying. It's very annoying.
So I do think though, and I don't even know if this is pushback because I feel like it's different than what you're talking about, that there is, and maybe this is part of my like having been an obnoxious pro-lifer, I don't know. But like, I feel like there's a point that a lot of them have. I feel like there is a place for the pro-life person to kind of put on a Christian apologist hat. I just don't think that talking to a pro-life atheist is that point. Because I feel like there's a worldview layer that happens once you dig far enough if you're like talking with a pro-choice person and you hit the bedrock of like, oh, well, they're a utilitarian or something. It's like, well, here's the problem. Okay. I have two choices. I can either pull out the repugnant conclusion and try and go into some like weird oddball utilitarian argument, or I'm going to try and convince them not to be a utilitarian, so that I can get them to embrace my conclusion on abortion. And it's like, there's an extent to which like it might be appropriate to get into a worldview discussion in the means, in the conversation you're having with someone who's pro-choice, like for the end of convincing them about abortion.
Sure.
And like, while I don't find atheistic objective morality compelling, I'm not worried about like changing an atheist who believes in objective morality's mind about that, because we already have enough. Like, we could get along. This is great.
Well, you bring up a good point. I forgot to say this. A lot of times they will say that they're arguing with me so they can make my arguments better when I talk to other atheists. And that might be the most condescending thing that they can say. Because so what happens is they see weaknesses in my argument because they think atheistic objective morality doesn't make any sense. Right?
Uh-huh.
And they assume that a lot of other groups think that too. So they think that when I'm arguing with other secular pro-choice people, that when those people bring up, well, why should we care about morality? I won't have a good answer because I'm an atheist. What they're missing is that's not how that conversation goes almost ever. And to have a particularly philosophically minded, usually fairly intellectual Christian person who is coming from this specific worldview lecture me about how to talk to other atheists is absurd. And so I've had to say to a lot of people, because they'll say, well, I'm just trying to strengthen your arguments. For who? Because I could seriously think of one single time I can think of when another secular person, a pro-choice person, asked me to ground morality. One time. And this is interesting too, because we've had very different experiences with this. Josh and I know you guys have that come up a lot more often. I think it's because you've been on a lot of college campuses in person.
Right.
And you're talking to people of a very specific subset.
Right.
And also because they know you're a Christian, they're more likely to push you on that, because sort of the mirror image of what I'm talking about, they want to get into a religious debate too. But when I, as an atheist, am talking to other secular people about this, it is almost literally never about how to ground morality at all. Atheists usually just assume from the get-go, and agnostics, not just atheists, that humans are valuable. And the debate is about whether the embryo counts or not about why should we care about morality. And they have tons of examples in their own life where they do care about morality already. And it would just be a stalemate if they and I even argued about that, unless they're actually advocating for some kind of moral anarchy, and they never are. Generally speaking, the Christian apologist pro-lifer, sometimes they'll say they're trying to help me improve my arguments, but they're mistaking their experiences and the way people respond to them with mine, and it's very different. And I have found that almost exclusively, if I'm in a position where I need to defend atheistic morality, it's to a Christian pro-lifer, not a pro-choice secular person, almost exclusively. And why do I need to it's like Andrew was saying, we're already on the same team. Why am I spending time on this? I don't see the point. So I don't.
Okay. So I predicted this would probably be a very long episode. And at this point, we are well over an hour. And so we've done 4 types. So let's go ahead and call it here. And this is going to be part 1. And we're going to record a part 2 with the 4 other types, as well as general thoughts and tips, how to deal with these people. What should we be doing? How should we think about any infighting with pro-life people versus pro-choice people? Is this infighting what we're doing right now? We have some thoughts about that, and we will do that in the next episode. So thanks so much, Monica, for being here. I'm so glad we're doing this with you, and we will be back for part 2.
Thanks for having me.